We might be on introduction part 37. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that.
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. And I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it.
Welcome, everybody, to Write Out Loud, a podcast about writing, storytelling, authorship, all the creative arts that we like to celebrate here on the show. I, of course, am Matt Cassem. I'm joined by the famous, the lovely, the amazing, the wonderful, and magical Christina.
Hello. You know, these intros get longer and longer, and I know no one out there in podcast land can see my face, but I am totally red. Thank you for the introduction, my wonderful friend, Matt.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. We are also joined by our very special guest, and we're super excited to have him on. This is W.T. Meadows. Hi, W.T.
Hey. So I am an author of the Shaman States of America, the South, or the Mantle series, as part of that new adult series, the new adult world, excuse me. My newest novel, Introduction Events, came out in October of last year, following I would say, surprisingly successful Kickstarter run. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that and all of the just myriad things I learned from there. I'm a big old nerd who lives with my wife, my kids, and my dogs in Austin, play a bunch of games, do a bunch of wood carving, go to a bunch of conventions. That's what I do.
That's awesome. Well, we're super stoked that you've agreed to join us because we wanted to talk a lot about your process as a writer and kind of your journey as an author. And I think helping everyone really understand what that's like, right? And what it was like for you, because there's a couple of things I think that stand out about your journey that we want to really kind of focus in on. So I know, Christina, you had a question you wanted to kind of kick things off with.
WT, can you tell us a little bit about your writing journey? I know Introduction Events is a solo effort, but you also have co-authored. So I would just like to know a little bit more about how you work with somebody else and then go to a solo project.
For sure, yeah.
How was that for you? What was your process? What was your experience like?
Sure, yeah. So I like to feel and believe that everyone's process is going to be just wildly different. And that was because my experience was certainly a bit bizarre. So we're going to start just a whirlwind tour through WT's writing experience. And it started when I was in college 400,000 years ago. No, actually, it was about 20 something years ago. But I had my first idea for what I thought was going to be the coolest fantasy novel. When I was this whole thing. And it just hit whole cloth when I was in the shower one day, where those just like weird inspiration thing happened. And so I tried to write it. I thought that would be really cool. And I got about a few thousand words in, maybe. And I got to some dialogue, and it was terrible. It was just horrific. And I got discouraged. So I'd put it aside. A few years later, I'd be like, I still like the idea for that book. I'm going to try it. So I'd get to any amount of dialogue, and it would be terrible. And so that happened for a number of years until I was out of college, and I wanted to write a webcomic. So it's writing and illustrating, and webcomics, the script is entirely dialogue. So I accidentally taught myself how to write dialogue after publishing a webcomic for 2 years. So in the little while after that, I went back and did my first NaNoWriMo, and National Novel Writing Month, if you're not familiar. And it is an experience in November where people get together in either physical or digital communities and try to write 50,000 words of a novel. And that first Nano, I wrote the first draft of that fantasy book. And in retrospect, it's still pretty terrible. But the thing is, it was done. I wrote a draft. I got it on paper. And so the next year, I kept doing that for a few years and meeting different communities. And then about 10 years ago, in 2015, I moved to Austin. And so 9 years ago. And I met this Krishan Keller Hanna person at my first Nano event. And she was talking about this other world that she was making. So I wrote the first draft of Introduction Events as keep in mind, this is 9 years ago. Wrote the first draft that year, and a little while later, maintained friendship with her, and she developed this Shaman States world. And through crazy random happenstance, I decided to shelve the Introduction Events book, again, as the solo project. And then because she offered me a spot to write a 5-novel series in her world. And so that experience of co-writing a novel was not something I was expecting, and I had no idea what I was doing in that first novel. And largely what it amounted to was, this is your world. You tell me what kinds of things will work and what kinds of things won't. And it was a lot of, I have this idea. This is the story I want to tell. This is the thing that I want to do. Does that work? And if not, how do we tell this story together? So co-writing,
Sure.
in my experience, was so much of, I've got this idea. What do you think? And thankfully, Krishan and I have worked together. We've been friends for a long time and have an immense amount of respect for each other. And so that has really helped in, does this work or does it not? And having, at times, some really, really hard conversations. I learned so much by being told with love that some of my stuff was just not great. And I had to really change a lot about how I approached developing characters and representing things through some pretty tough feedback from both my editor for that series and also from Krishan herself. But thankfully, due to the respect and the love that they had in being able to share those things, that hard feedback, I was able to push through that. But again, push through it with the help and support of others. So like my wife was incredible in pushing me to do these things. Like the of course, blanking on the word that is the beginning of a book. I dedication. Let's go with that word.
Mhm.
How about that?
Sure.
The dedication for Introduction Events is for Suze, who punched me and told me to finish a novel, because that's literally what happened to get me writing my first Nano. Was there was a cloud syncing thing that happened with my notes, and an old novel note that I had written on the bus one day synced to my computer, and she saw it and was mad that I wasn't done. And so I got home and she punched me and I was like, what is going on with this? Like, what? And she said that the story, the one that just showed up, I don't know how or when you wrote it, but it's not done and it needs to be done. Dear reader, it is still not done.
Nice.
But really the
That's
key
awesome.
is, in my experience, is really comes down to stepping out of the comfort zone and asking for just the most honest feedback you can get.
Yeah.
It is hard to hear at times, but it is so helpful for creating something that's authentic. And like, you really need to hear that, because if Krishan's going to tell me something isn't working for whatever reason, so she's a Black woman. I am just the most vanilla, straight, white, middle-aged dude. And so like, I need to know that those voices that are not my own are not reading correctly, because she loves me. And if she tells me that, it's for my own good. If someone on the internet says that because of my ignorance, and I do something that's going to hurt someone on the internet, their feedback is not going to necessarily come from a place of love and or necessarily from empathy. So I need to know kind of what I'm going into, so that I'm not saying something that will A, be incorrect, or B, through my own ignorance, And ignorance has taken on a very strong tone of things, but I mean this by not knowing, not willful ignorance, by just the fact of not knowing something. I do not want something that I have said to come across through my ignorance to hurt someone.
Sure.
Never want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
as an editor, I will say this. We never, ever, ever want to hurt someone's feelings. We just want to help them become a better writer, or most of us anyway.
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it
and,
is.
well,
It is
Yeah.
coming from a place of pure, genuine. Let's make this
Embitterment,
story
or
the best it
whatever
can
that-
be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question for you about something you said, because in terms of this sort of lens we're looking at through, which is you've been co-writing with Krishan, you've got introduction events, which is your own work, right? And in that process, obviously your own work, you're calling the shots, you get to make happen whatever happened. Like, you don't really have to bounce it off anybody. Now, we'll talk about some of the ways that you did bounce it off other people, but when it's co-writing with somebody else, were there ever difficult conversations about the direction that it was going? Not necessarily the tone of the character that you just talked about, but really like you wanted to take it one way and Krishan was like, and I don't need tea or anything, but I'm just saying, did you have those types of conflicts as well?
I mean, to an extent, yeah. I mean, there were a few. So, humorously enough, it wasn't until the third book of 5 that Krishan said, I need this particular scene to be in the book. So I got a whole 2 and change books without really any, I guess, editorial leaning.
Sure.
And like the scene that she I don't even remember what it was that she specifically said, I need this to be in there. I was like, okay, cool. Like, no big deal. I think it was that I needed to introduce an important character into that at that point from someone else's story. Cause like one of the fun things about writing in a larger literary universe is that like characters that other people make are still in the world. So like, for instance, if Tony Stark rolls up in an Iron Man comic, like, you still know who Tony Stark is. Like, it's not a huge surprise. So when characters from her books or somebody else's books like show up, it's just like, okay, how do I write that character more effectively? And I think that was what happened in the third book. Nice. But there was definitely a fairly major plot point in the fourth book that I was extremely uncomfortable with how she wanted to do it. And it wasn't because it was like a bad thing. I think that where we ended up going was because, so it worked out very, very well because we worked together.
Nice.
Because my name's on it. So I'm not going to, no matter what I put out there, my name's on it. So I had to find a place that I was going to be comfortable with and that she was going to be comfortable with, because it's her world. It's her stuff. And so we had to find a way to make that work. Great. You do that, or you leave the contract or whatever, like, but you have to find a way to do a thing that you are comfortable with having your name associated with. Thankfully, Krishan and I, through lots of love and respect with each other, never have put each other in that position, but we had to find a place that was a thing that would work for the two of us. And we found, like, by talking through, okay, why do you want it this way? Why do you want this thing to happen? We figured out what again, like, if you have a disagreement, you find the thing that is the minimal point where you have an agreement and you work from there. And so we backed it off and we then built up from where the place where we agreed. And it turned out great. I'm super proud of the way that book ended up. But there's actually quite a few reasons why I published the first 3 books within like a month. I had written them all, of course, months ahead of time. But then there was over a year wait for book 4, because that was another one of those things where we had to kind of take it back to the studs and see how we could make this work. Part of that was I had a whole lot to learn from my editor, because she very kindly brought it back to me, being like, I've been telling you these things for 3 books and you've not either listened or whatever. And again, that's on me. I need to learn to do these things. And so, like, thankfully, due to her very strong feedback, I pushed through that. And I'm a much, much better author now because of that. And so working through those things with my editor and also with Krishan really, really allowed for fine tuning of the craft of that book. But at the same time, oh man, those were hard lessons.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, there's actually an author out there, Sylvia Day, who has said in the past that you actually need to write 3 books before your 4th one is actually good.
1,000%.
She said it's not until that 4th book that you actually kind of know what it is that you're doing. So
Oh yeah.
she actually suggests not publishing those first 3 books, but I'm not for that at all. I think let them be what they are, let audience see a growth or whatever.
Sure.
I don't believe in
could
drawer
absolutely
babies.
talk more about that process and
Yeah.
getting similar
But-
advice from a comic artist that I love and respect. So yeah, 100% agree with you there.
Yeah. So let's talk about introduction events and
Yeah.
this Kickstarter that you did, because I'm really interested in that. We haven't had anybody on the podcast yet that has experienced Kickstarter for books, but I do know
Yeah.
people that have done it. So tell us about that, how that started, how it worked.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll pick up the story for like after I finished publishing the Shaman States books, because as I was waiting to publish the 5th one, I was like done with editing and all that other stuff. And I was reading through, I was like, I want to go back. The story's good. I want to do introduction events. So I went and read it through again. And I was just like, after publishing 5 novels, this book is nowhere near as good as I thought it was. So I completely rewrote it. It was a
Wow.
3rd-person limited perspective initially, as were the Shaman States books. And by the time that I was done with those, I was like, this book really needs to be 1st person. So I rewrote it into 1st person. And it is so much better by that, but also by the having honed my craft for a number of years and having published a number of books. So all of those things added together to do that. But what got us to Kickstarter was my plan was to go from working with Krishan and her publishing group to I wanted to have it traditionally published. And so I sought representation, and I started talking to agents and editors and that kind of thing for about 1.5 years. And then I started seeing the people that agents were looking for, and I started talking to specifically, I worked a convention where there were some LGBT publishing companies that were in representation there. So I was talking to them about introduction events, the themes and the stuff that was with it. And like, but I as soon as like I started seeing like, oh, this could actually be an interesting story from their perspective, I had the realization in horror of, if I seek representation with these people, who am I excluding from getting representation from them that are actually within the community? I can't even, that's not even remotely close to appropriate. And so I'm still friends with them, with those publishing companies. And like, we still like share each other's work on socials and Signal Boost and that kind of thing. And that's awesome. But that was when I realized that all of the agents that I wanted to work with weren't really seeking straight white middle-aged men. And I don't want to work with the people who are. And so I said, you know what? I got plenty of advantages on myself. I'm going to do it my own way. And I'm not going to take a spot from someone else who might not have all of the whatever that I have. And so I was like, I have friends who do Kickstarter stuff. Krishan has done a number of very successful, wonderful Kickstarters. I have other friends who have also gone through that. I'm literally wearing the shirt from my friend's bakery who kickstarted their physical location 2 weeks after mine started. So like, I'm a huge believer in going out and finding the crowdsourcing, because if the people believe in it, then like they'll make it happen. So I started the Kickstarter thing with my little video, because one of the things that really helps is having the good hook, the elevator pitch that works in that regard. And that's your video for the most part. And so I started it being like, hey, so this is my deal. I get asked 2 questions every time someone asks about my books. Is it available in hardback? Is it available in audiobook? I'm still an indie publisher. And like I'm doing this all on my own. So absolutely it is not available in audiobook yet because I cannot afford it. They are expensive. But I figured hardback might be doable. I can make that happen. And if we can cover the costs of those, the books, the hardbacks that people have been asking for years can get those. And one of those people who've been asking for it for years, me, can also get one. And so really it was kind of a selfish way that I could get my own hardback. But so
awesome.
Part of the thing was you have to figure out the plan. You have to figure out what are my rewards going to be? What are my bonuses going to be? What are my various tiers going to be? How's the shipping going to work? You have to figure a lot of those things out ideally before you get rolling. Otherwise, you accidentally have success and shoot yourself in the foot like I did. Because I had a lot of those things planned out, even up to and including getting artists to do things like stickers and prints and like those kinds of things along the way. And I was like, cool, these will be stretch goals. There's no way we're going to hit these stretch goals that I've got planned for like at least 2 or 3 weeks. We'll probably have hit the stretch goals by the time we hit the mid campaign slump, but not really before that. Mm-hmm. Dear reader, we hit my goal within, I think, 2 hours of launching the campaign. I was completely floored. No part of me was expecting that. But like part of that happened due to the prepping for the cover is gorgeous. So again, looking for I'm biased, of course, but the if you get someone, you shouldn't judge a book by cover, but we all do. Every single one of us do or does, and that's why I have an editor. But so Danny from DL Creative Solutions did my cover and my graphic design. So like she did the logo work, she did the cover work, and is brilliant. And so finding someone who is willing to take your vision, because none of these things, like even as an indie author, I'm not an island. I absolutely have to do this through the help of other people. And so it really helps that the people who I've gotten involved have also been big fans of the work. So like, I don't think Danny will mind me sharing, but she's, as the graphic designer, who is part of the reason why I credit her with her beautiful design, with being part of the reason why it stood out so well on Kickstarter. So like they see those gorgeous clouds and the girl falling and like, what's up with that? And then the shapes with the images there. I absolutely attribute Danny's beautiful art with part of why that stood out. And so we hit the goal in like 2 hours. I was like, this is not expected. So I started making graphics because I have a degree in graphic design. So like I was like doing the graphic work for that. And I was about to put out the graphic of, okay, so here are the stretch goals. By the time I was done making the graphic, we had already passed where the first stretch goal was. Wow. Which was for stickers that were designed by another local artist friend of mine. But of course that wasn't ready because I had told her, you don't need to worry about this. Like this, we're not going to hit the stretch goals for 2 weeks. So yeah, within a day, I had bumped the stretch goal thing twice. And by the time I posted it, we had passed both of the stretch goals that I had created and bumped twice. Yeah. But the other side of why I think this worked in that success was getting the buy-in of the other people who were involved. So these other artists that I looped into the process, by talking to them about the process and getting them interested, they shared it with their audiences. And so I had not only my stuff, and Danny, of course, was a huge proponent of like sharing it, and so her stuff, not only is her design work brilliant, but like her social media presence is fantastic. And so like her signal boosting this thing was helping, because that's the other thing with this process. Even as an indie author, you are still part of a community. And every time that community signal boosts it out, that helps them, and it also helps you. Yeah. So sharing out Monica Gallagher, who was the person who designed one set of stickers there. She does such great work. And part of the reason why I wanted to get her to do stickers, because I wanted people to see her great work. And then K-Ray Creations and now K-Ray Sketches, who's the person that did the art prints, which are gorgeous. And because she was interested in the project. So you get the buy-in from them and it becomes cyclical. And that's where
That
you find the
steamrolls.
success is when you can get the people who are interested to share it out on their own because they want to. A number of the people who I paid my editors, I paid my all of those things. A number of those people still invested and ordered copies through the Kickstarter as well. I didn't ask them to do that.
That's
I
awesome.
wasn't expecting that, but I'm extremely honored by the fact that that was something they opted to do. Krishan was actually upset that she wasn't the first person to back it. And like, it's pretty incredible. This is actually her copy, to be honest. So it's one of the last couple I need to personalize. So Danny's and Krishan's are the last two I need to sign. So I just happen to have it on hand. But yeah, so like you get people interested by investing in them as humans, and that will come back around and it will continue to perpetuate. Again, of course, as long as you're actually telling good stories that are worth anything. So like, it's funny. So Kirsten from K-Ray Creations, who again did the prints, and I'll show you all, like this is one of the ones that she painted. Great for audio medium, of course.
It works.
But like, she read the book as she was doing the painting stuff. And so like, we fired back and forth any number of conversations. And of course that would inspire her to tweet about it more or do on Instagram or whatever. And so like, it was absolutely self-perpetuating.
That's awesome. I have two questions for you.
Mm.
One is sort of an aside, so maybe it's not a question, but you mentioned these folks that kind of jumped in and you worked so closely with to make this come to reality, and that you're talking very highly of their work and all of that. And you had asked us a question sort of in the midst of the early part of this where you said, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about other podcasts. I think it's always good to just uplift everybody, right? Because there's enough success to go around for everybody. So I think sometimes when we get afraid to like, ooh, but if I mention them, then my listeners might run away and listen to them.
Yeah.
Who cares?
It's
Go
not
listen.
competition.
Please. Like, it's not a competition. Like, we all want to see at the table. So it's great. I love that. So second thing is, would you consider doing a Kickstarter for the audiobook?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would.
Yeah.
So because that is, so that's there's, it's funny. There was I actually had a hidden thing that was for a hidden amount on the graphics of like, here are the stretch goals. And it was just like, and that was the, if we get to this amount, then I will do the audiobook. But like, I didn't want to put that out there because the amount that it would take is absurd. So I didn't want it to be like, I didn't want to guilt people into it, but if we hit it, I was certainly going to unveil it. So awesome. But yes, absolutely I would. But the thing with that is helping explain the actual costs that go into it. So it's hours of paying an actor, or a number of people brought up me potentially reading it. I did live streams of the first few chapters during the campaign. And so those are available on my YouTube channel. But so a number of people were like, well, why don't you read it? And I'd certainly be into that. I used to be an actor as well. Like, I have a degree in theater. And so like that was certainly a thought, but still paying for that. And then absolutely, even if I were to do it, because that would cut down the costs, an actual engineer has to go through and make sure that it's right. So I have to pay them.
Yeah.
So whether I'm paying a for reals legit voice actor to do this, and I've got a few that I've actually talked to about that process, or whether or not it's me and paying just a studio to do that, that's a lot of money for like a 9-hour book.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah.
And so like explaining that in a way that people can like get their brain around in a Kickstarter is
Yeah.
it is complicated.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about introduction events. Tell our audience a little bit about what the book is about, and then we're going to dive into some really juicy stuff.
Ooh, cool. All right. So, Introduction Events is a young adult superhero novel with the hashtag of no spandex, because they don't do that and they don't go blow up cities. It's really about teenagers, about 3 teenagers who deal with the traumas of being a teenager. In the first 3 chapters, you learn that the main character is a teenage girl who's suffered some massive trauma with her social standing and was shunned by all of her popular society as a former cheerleader. And now part of the way that she deals with that is through self-harm. And so that's a thing that there's a content warning at the beginning of the book that is discussed. We'll go into more about how I represent that in the book, but that's a trauma that she's dealing with. In the second chapter, you find out that one kid who's got all of his stuff together, his whole life is literally mapped out ahead of him. His dad is a state senator. The book takes place in West Texas, very small, fictional West Texas town. And his dad is a state senator, and he's got lots of power. And so in the town, he's got anything he could want, except for freedom and how his life is going to be going. So his life has been planned out by his father to go and be into politics. And he finds out as he goes that he wants to be a teacher. And like, it's not his, I guess, trauma, quote unquote, is not as much of a thing that is, you might not initially think of that as a traumatic event, and it's certainly not as traumatic as the one we're about to get to, or leave for that matter. But at the same time, it leaves him feeling trapped, and he wants to get away, and he doesn't know how to do that. His dad's not even a bad guy. Like, he wants the best for his son, but his son doesn't want that. And then you also find out in that shortly after that the third of these kids comes from a physically abusive home. His dad's been physically abusive to the point that he drove away his mom. And so the kid's been stuck with his dad for 10 years. And that sucks. So everything about his life is about trying to escape in a different way. So he's in school, studying all over the place, and he's in football. And these kids, as if their lives aren't complicated enough, let's just give them superpowers. Why not? And so the girl Lee wakes up on her ceiling, not really knowing how to control her powers. Peyton, the guy whose dad's a senator, after football practice, he walks into the shower and ends up across the world in a desert with a big old scary snake looking at him. And a little before that, we've discovered that there was, at the other football team across town, 2 kids at football practice there was a tackle, and one of them ended up on fire. So, yeah, it's
Startling.
shenanigans. And so those are the 3 kids, and they're dealing with all their own stuff, and then they have powers. And they're like, what do we do with all this?
Being a teenager and then adding powers to it. What a dynamic.
Exactly. Like, you don't need superheroes blowing up cities. You don't need all of the action fight. Like, they're great. I love superhero movies and like that kind. I love it. They're great. But that's not the story I want to tell. I want to tell the story about kids. I want to tell the story about these kids dealing with their traumas and the lens by which they have to deal with that is supernatural. So then we add in the additional perspective of the fact that there are schools. Kind of, you can take whatever influences from popular media of the schools where these kids would learn how to do things, but there's 2 different schools. And that's where I wanted to make things a little bit different, because they both have very different philosophies as far as how the kids go and how the kids learn and how to get the kids to the schools. So those are additional factions complicating this already convoluted narrative. So it sounded like I interrupted you. I apologize. Please go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to talk about something that you had mentioned earlier, and that is that representation really matters to you, and representation as a whole, not just with race, but also with LGBTQ. Talk a little bit about why it matters to you.
So I think it's super, super important that we tell stories that are not just us, because it helps us get into the mindset of understanding and leading. And because if we are learning empathetically about other people's journeys, then we are going to be, as humans, more likely to treat them with respect and to treat them better. So as selfishly, part of my journey with this was I wanted to understand how, my friend's journey as they came out as Ace around the time that I was starting to write this book. And Lee, the main character, is Ace. And I didn't I wasn't judgmental or think it was bad or anything, but I just didn't understand. And so I talked to them about it, and I talked to other people that I learned were Ace, and I was like, okay, cool. Like, I want to learn about you and your journey through this, so that as I understand it, and my way as an author and a storyteller is I want to share that. I want to share that journey through my own understanding, my own learning. And like I mentioned with the agents and whatnot, there are plenty of stories about middle-aged straight white dudes. And that's I'm not as interested in telling those stories, because there are plenty of people that'll tell those, and that's great. That's fine. But I want to learn more about how people tick and what makes them work and how their journeys have happened. And so if I can learn, hopefully I can share those kinds of stories, at least through an archetypal sense that is empathetic and understanding and is emotionally engaging enough. So I mentioned that Lee's journey, not only is she Ace in a West Texas good old boy town where she clearly is she's already been ostracized from her, what she thought of was her community. And then now she has realized that she's Ace and part of the LGBT community. And so she's not going to be able to share that with them. Well, conveniently, another guy moved into town, and again, West Texas, not the most culturally diverse or racially diverse, and so a black family has moved in and opened up a coffee shop. So she becomes best friends with the kid whose mom's running the shop. As it turns out, he's gay, and so they can bond over their shared experience there. He's black, she's white. They're not interested in each other, but they can share in that relationship with, here's how I'm feeling about these things, and they can love and respect each other, and they can grow in how they go. So throughout the course of it, he's aware that she's self-harming and wants to help his friend, but he doesn't know how. And so he struggles with, how do I get my friend out of this destructive behavior when I don't know the words? When I don't know what's going to help her or what's going to spur her into a downward cycle. And so that's a struggle that he has throughout the novel as she battles with it on her own and with him. And so these things, they're all connected, and they all tie together. But you have to have an understanding of the things in order to make them work. And you have to know what's going on. You have to understand how someone who is Ace, or how someone who is gay, or how someone who deals with self-harm, or someone who would respond to being abandoned by their mother, to be stuck in a home of a physically abusive person while they are trying to hide that about their life. So all of these things are interconnected, and you have to go about it very carefully, because you got to get it right. Otherwise, like I mentioned with Krishan offering the feedback, she'll offer the feedback through love and empathy. But if I get it wrong and I hurt someone, their inclination is not going to be I understand, Mr. Straight White Middle-aged person, that you didn't mean to hurt me in this way. And that, like, I don't ever want to be someone who does that.
Yep.
And so I need to know on the front end. So I need to talk to people. I need to request that feedback. I need to go out and hear from people who are not me to get those things right.
Yeah. I love that. It reminds me of the phrase, and I've heard it from a friend of mine. I don't know who originally said it, but that we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their behaviors. Right. So the audience who doesn't know you from Adam reads this, and maybe you did get it wrong, and they think, oh, he's just trying to like make fun or stereotype or whatever. And that wasn't your intention at all. Right. So yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. That's it.
And it takes the whole concept of like authorial intent versus like reception into a, there's a whole matter of like, it doesn't matter what I intend, especially if I've hurt someone. So I've got to do everything. I've got to do my work on the front end to ensure that I'm not putting additional work onto more of my work onto someone else to do.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
So I think you spoke a little bit earlier that Introduction Events is going to be the first in a series. Do you know how many are going to go? When's the next one coming out? Tell us what's on deck.
Yeah, sure. So this is, I don't know where I've officially announced it being. Yeah, it's intended as a trilogy at this point. And the funny thing is, if you look at the logo, and then if you look at the logos for the other books, which because Danny got excited about it, she went ahead and designed logos for the other two books. There are elements for those other books in this cover. I'm not going to say what they are, but they are, when people eventually read the next two books, they will see visual elements that are already in this cover. But so they're coming. I've got the tent poles for the books 2 and 3 of the series, but as I've been saying, I got about 20,000 words. This book's 100,000 words, about 400 pages. So I've written about 20-ish thousand words of book 2. However, I hit a pretty hard research wall when I realized, oh, this one character, I need to know how they're going to react to things. And it's a thing that I need to do a whole bunch more research on. So, because I need to get it right. So I'm in heavy research mode as far as that goes. So like, when's it going to be available? No idea. But at the same time, there is work being done on it. But I've also got a few other kind of irons in the fire. That's actually one of the things I'm starting off a Patreon. There's not a lot going on over there yet, but the goal of that, not intended as a plug, but like this is the thought process behind it, is because I've got 4 or 5 different novels that I've got I'm in varying degrees of process with. Here are the themes for those novels. Without spoiling any of the things, which of these do you think that we should work on this month? And so that month we vote in Patreon about like, okay, here are the ones where you all feeling great. I'll put the most work in that. If I get inspired, I'm absolutely going to bounce over and work on that other book. But I've got the novel that's the hitman driving across Texas late at night, like hitman road trip while bleeding out. Like that's an actual novel that I'm working on that I'm really excited to work on, by the way. But so there's that. There's the Shaman State. I guess I'll just announce it. The Krishan and I've talked about doing a second Shaman State series that we've tentpoled. There's a book that I've lovingly referred to as Pokemon Go by way of Stranger Things is Upside Down. And I've written 2 drafts of that. So like that one's pretty far along. So that might be the next one. And really it just kind of depends on like what is getting the most traction with people and what my brain is leaning into, and B, what I'm caught up on for research. Because all of these projects are going to require me to know people. Yeah. Maybe it's laziness, but I don't really want to go do all the research into the military systems to write a whatever book about the whatever, and that's not a thing I want to research. I want to research how people interact. I want to research how someone's maternal grandparents immigrating and having a specific religion and how that goes down through the family. I want to know how I want to know someone's journey as they experience a transition, like a trans person goes through transition, and what does that look like from the female, male, non-binary in all of that journey and all of that spectrum, and represent that effectively. And that doesn't even take the sexuality into question, because like the sexuality spectrum and then the gender spectrum are also important things to understand and to relate effectively and thematically. And so all of those things you have to understand before you put pen to paper. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, I like that you talked about representation. We've talked about that a little bit in this episode, but we mentioned Heartstopper. We kind of talked about the colors, the subtle colors and things they used in Heartstopper. And you mentioned that Danny had already kind of weaved some of those pieces from books 1, 2, and 3 kind of into the cover. And were there other, without giving them away, but were there other little breadcrumbs or things that you kind of planted in this novel that sort of, hint or foreshadow at those things?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a great question. Thank you. So the one of the major things that is an indication is the cover itself is hues of purples, grays, whites, and blacks. And so that is the kind of initial subtle framing of Lee as Ace. And then those kinds of colorations play in and are represented in the novel as it goes. But yeah, so colors in novels, the hues that are represented in the logos for books 2 and 3 are also very important to the characters as they are represented. Like, big spoiler for things that I'm not going to talk about. Sorry.
No,
But
it's good.
yeah, the cover is going to be the easiest example. I also had a series of bookmarks printed with the kind of longer version of the logo, which is black, white, and purple, which are often represented as part of the Ace flag. So those things are, if you know what to look for, or if you're within the community, because really the goal with that was not to kind of shout it from the rooftops per se of any particular thing, but really to add kind of that wink and a nod to the people who already are aware of the community, or who are already in the mindset to be like, cool, that is clearly for me. The other thing that is a nod to that in the very beginning is in the second or third paragraph, Lee's talking about a Dragon Ball Z poster. So okay, so we're getting an anime influence in there and those things. So really the anime nerds, myself included, where those things are intended as the early homages to hopefully get the buy-in for those people to say, yes, I understand. I am not saying these things as an outsider. I am saying these things as someone who hopefully understands where you are. And so come trust me and join me on this journey.
Nice. Okay. Nice. Well, Christina, any final questions as we sort of wrap our episode?
I think he answered everything with the exception of, where do we find you? Where can people find the book?
So you can find the digital copies of any of my novels in really actually all of the digital marketplaces. You can just look for WT Meadows. Introduction Events is, of course, the one that I'm going to encourage most people to dive really straight in. But yeah, you can get that. You can get that digitally available. Search WT Meadows on Amazon Books, Barnes and Noble, wherever. You can. I'm hoping to soon be making the paperbacks of Introduction Events available. I'm currently in the process of fulfilling all of those Kickstarter rewards, and I did not want to make a physical copy available on Amazon or a local Austin bookstore if I hadn't already given to the people who made the project happen. So, but since we literally sent out the last of the shipments this morning, I can start the ball rolling of hopefully getting those available on Amazon and whatnot. But there's also a few. So if you live in Austin, I'm in ask at your local bookstore, the Half Price Books or Book People and that kind of thing. Because I'm talking to them in a couple local comic shops. Because even though it's a traditional novel instead of a comic book, it's intended to kind of resonate with the people who would be going to a comic shop. So like
Sure.
a couple of the local comic shops, I've already had conversations that they seem amenable to me carrying it. So that'll be pretty rad. But yeah, on any of the social media stuff, it's WT Meadows author. So YouTube,
WT Meadows author. Okay.
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that, whatever.
That's awesome. You can also check out our show notes and check out the social media that we'll push out as well. You'll have all that information there too. So if you miss it here, you're driving, you can't write it down. It's okay. We got you. Don't worry about it. We got you. Just be safe. Well, cool. Well, WT, thank you so much for joining us. I think we've learned a lot about your journey. We've learned a lot about what it takes to really go through that process. And I think even more so around Kickstarter that frankly, we just weren't familiar with, but we knew it's a thing, but we didn't know what it's like to go through that. So thank you for sharing that with us. We very much appreciate that. And Christina, thank you as always for being here and being my guiding light.
Nowhere else I'd rather be.
Awesome. Well, and that'll do it for us for this episode. So thanks for stopping by. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.